Picture this. You're a weary traveler riding across the Kansas prairie in 1872. You've been on the trail for days. You're hungry, exhausted, desperate for a hot meal and a place to rest. Finally, you spot a small cabin with a sign, "Groceries and Inn." You walk in. A beautiful young woman with dark eyes greets you. Her name is Kate. She's charming, speaks perfect English, tells you about her spiritual powers. She seats you at the only table in the room, a crude wooden bench with your back against a canvas curtain that divides the cabin. You order food, maybe some crackers, sardines, coffee. You're so tired you barely notice the older man moving behind the curtain. You feel the shadow before you hear anything. Then a hammer swings through the canvas, strikes you in the right temple with bone-crushing force. You collapse forward onto the table. Rough hands drag you behind the curtain. A knife slices across your throat. Your blood pours into a trapdoor leading to a cellar. When your body stops twitching, they pull you through the small door, barely 18 by 24 inches. Later tonight, they'll bury you in the orchard behind the cabin. You are the 11th person to die this way at the Bender Inn. But you won't be the last to be buried there. This is the story of the Bloody Benders, America's first documented serial killer family. And the mystery of what happened to them has never been solved. Subscribe right now if you want dark history that'll keep you up at night. Hit that bell. Tell me in the comments if you've heard of the Bloody Benders before. I'm betting most of you haven't, because this story is wild. A family operating a murder inn on the Kansas frontier. At least 11 people confirmed dead, maybe 20 plus. Bodies buried in the garden. A blood-soaked cellar. Victims' skulls crushed with hammers. And then the family just vanished. Disappeared into history. Never caught. Never punished. For 150 years, people have been obsessed with this case. Books, documentaries, museum exhibits, archaeological digs happening right now at the murder site. But the fundamental mystery remains. Who were the Bloody Benders? And where did they go? Let's start at the beginning. Let's go to Kansas in 1870, when 4 strangers arrived on the frontier and opened an inn on the loneliest stretch of trail in America. 1870, Labette County, Kansas. The Civil War had ended 5 years earlier. The Homestead Act of 1862 was bringing thousands of settlers west. If you could claim 160 acres and farm it for 5 years, the land was yours. Free. Southeast Kansas was wide open prairie. Sparse settlements. Few towns. Dangerous territory. Outlaws used it as hiding ground, and tensions with Native American tribes were constant. The Osage Mission Trail cut through this emptiness, running 47 miles from the Osage Mission, now St. Paul, to Independence, Kansas. Travelers used it constantly. Immigrants heading west, merchants transporting goods, families seeking homesteads. It was one of the loneliest, most isolated roads in America. Perfect hunting ground. In 1870 or early 1871, records are unclear. 4 people arrived in Labette County and claimed a homestead about 8 miles northeast of the small town of Cherryvale. They called themselves the Bender family. John Bender Sr., about 60 years old, described as gruff, unpleasant, spoke mostly German. Some accounts say he was Dutch. He had a violent temper and limited English. Kate Bender Sr., sometimes called Ma or Elvira, about 55, also German-speaking, described as surly, unfriendly, with a face that frightened children. She rarely smiled. John Bender Jr., about 27, tall, powerful build, quiet, spoke German and broken English. Some neighbors noted he seemed simple-minded or slow. Kate Bender Jr., about 24. This is where it gets interesting. Kate was striking, dark hair, dark eyes, well-formed figure. She spoke fluent English with barely an accent. She was charming when she wanted to be, educated beyond what you'd expect for a frontier woman. Here's the thing. Nobody actually knew if they were a real family. Most neighbors assumed John Jr. and Kate Jr. were married, common-law husband and wife. Some thought Kate Jr. was Ma Bender's daughter. Others weren't sure about any of the relationships. The family may have been 4 criminals who'd met elsewhere and decided to work together. Pretending to be related gave them cover. But in 1870s Kansas, nobody asked too many questions about your past. Half the people on the frontier were running from something. The Benders built a small cabin 24 feet by 16 feet. One room. They divided it with a canvas curtain. The front half served as the inn and general store. They sold basic supplies, crackers, sardines, candy, coffee, tobacco. They offered hot meals and sleeping space for travelers. The back half, behind the curtain, was supposedly the family's living quarters. But really, it was the killing floor. Kate Jr. became the face of the operation. She was young, attractive, personable. She'd greet travelers, charm them, convince them to stay for a meal, and she advertised herself as a spiritualist healer. Spiritualism was huge in post-Civil War America. So many families had lost loved ones in the war, 600,000 plus dead. People desperately wanted to contact the dead, to know their sons and husbands were at peace. Mediums and spiritualists claimed they could communicate with the dead. Seances were popular. Kate positioned herself as a clairvoyant who could heal sickness, locate missing people, contact spirits. She placed ads in newspapers. Professor Miss Katie Bender can heal all sorts of diseases, can cure blindness, fits, deafness, and all such diseases, also deaf and dumbness. Residence 14 miles east of Independence, on the road from Independence to Osage Mission 1.5 miles southeast of Nora Head Station. Katie Bender. June 18, 1872. People came to see her, some for healing, some for seances, some just because travelers needed a place to stop. The inn did legitimate business. Many customers left satisfied, unharmed. If you had no money, or if multiple travelers showed up at once, the Benders let you go. But if you were alone, if you had money, if nobody was likely to miss you immediately, you were in danger. The Benders perfected a system. When a promising victim arrived, usually a single male traveler with money or valuables, Kate would greet them warmly, offer food, suggest they sit at the table to eat. The table was positioned against the canvas curtain. The guest of honor seat had your back to the curtain. While you ate, one of the Bender men, probably John Jr., who was big and strong, would position himself on the other side of the canvas, right behind where your head was. They'd wait until you were distracted, eating, talking to Kate, relaxed. Then, a massive hammer would swing through the canvas and strike you in the right temple or back of the head. The blow wasn't always fatal immediately. Sometimes victims would collapse, stunned but alive. That's when they'd pull you behind the curtain, lay you on the floor with your head over a small trapdoor, about 18 by 24 inches, that led to a cellar beneath the cabin. They'd slit your throat deeply, nearly decapitating you. Your blood would pour down into the cellar below. When you stopped moving, they'd strip your body of valuables. Cash, watches, jewelry, anything worth taking. Then came the hard part, disposal. That trapdoor was tiny. To get a body through it, they had to break bones, fold you unnaturally, force you through the small opening. Once in the cellar, bodies were temporary storage. At night, they drag corpses out and bury them in the orchard and vegetable garden behind the cabin. The garden served double purpose. It grew food, and the freshly turned soil from gardening disguised the freshly dug graves. Between 1871 and 1873, at least 11 people were murdered this way. Maybe more. Some estimates say 20 plus. We'll never know for sure because some victims were never identified. Most were men traveling alone, merchants carrying money, immigrants heading west with their life savings, doctors or lawyers on circuit, anyone who looked prosperous. But not all. The Benders killed at least one man traveling with his young daughter, George Lonker, and his 18-month-old baby. Both were found buried together in a single grave. Why did they get away with it for so long? 1. Location. The Kansas prairie was vast and empty. People disappeared on the trail all the time. Accidents, outlaws, hostile encounters. No one immediately suspected murder. 2. No postal service. Mail was unreliable. When someone didn't arrive at their destination, family members back east might not know for months. 3. High transient population. So many people moving west. Strangers passing through. Easy to blend in. Easy to disappear. 4. The Benders seemed normal. They operated a legitimate business. Had regular customers who came and went unharmed. Nobody suspected the friendly young woman running seances was part of a murder operation. 5. Kate's charm. She was the perfect distraction. Pretty, educated, interesting. People remembered her, not the murders. But some people noticed things. Not everyone who visited the Bender Inn was murdered. Some got lucky. Some got warned. William Pickering stopped at the inn in late 1872. Kate offered him the seat of honor, back to the curtain. But Pickering looked down and noticed something. Bloodstains on the canvas curtain. He immediately felt uneasy. When Kate pushed him to sit in that specific seat, he refused and moved to a different spot. Kate became aggressive, threatening. She grabbed a knife and moved toward him. Pickering bolted, ran to his horse and rode away as fast as he could. He told neighbors what happened, but nobody believed him. Kate Bender? The pretty spiritualist? A murderer? Ridiculous. Father Paul Ponziglian, a Catholic priest, stopped at the Bender Inn during a circuit through the area. While sitting at the table, he noticed one of the Bender men, probably John Jr., moving behind the curtain with a large hammer. Something about the man's posture, the way he was positioning himself, made Father Ponziglian deeply uncomfortable. He made an excuse about needing to check on his horse and quickly left. He later told his congregation about the incident, but again, nobody investigated. It sounded paranoid. A woman, name unrecorded, visited the inn and was threatened by Ma Bender with knives when she asked too many questions. She fled and reported it, but local authorities did nothing. The warnings were there. People saw signs. But in 1870s Kansas, you minded your own business. Accusations against neighbors were serious. Without proof, nothing happened. Then people started disappearing. 1872. George Lonker and his 18-month-old daughter vanished while traveling through the area. December 1872. Dr. William York disappeared while traveling the Osage Trail. Dr. York was different from the other victims. He had powerful family. His brother, Colonel Alexander York, was a Civil War veteran, lawyer, and Kansas state senator. When William didn't arrive at his destination, Colonel York started asking questions. March 1873. Colonel Alexander York assembled a search party of about 50 armed men. They questioned everyone along the Osage Trail, searched homesteads, followed his brother's route. On March 28, 1873, Colonel York and another man arrived at the Bender Inn. York explained that his brother, Dr. William York, had gone missing. Had the Benders seen him? The Benders admitted that yes, a doctor had stayed with them, but he'd left afterward perfectly fine. Maybe he'd run into trouble with Indians further down the trail. York found this answer plausible. Indian attacks did happen. He accepted their explanation, but Kate pushed too hard. She offered, for a price, to use her spiritual powers to locate the missing doctor. She could hold a seance, contact spirits, find out what happened. This seemed odd to York. Why would she immediately offer paid services instead of just expressing concern? Still, he had no evidence, so he thanked them and left. But York kept investigating. He talked to other travelers. Some mentioned uncomfortable experiences at the Bender Inn. That woman who'd been threatened with knives by Ma Bender came forward. York returned to the area in early April with armed men. On April 3, 1873, York and others planned to question the Benders more thoroughly. They organized a township meeting for May to officially investigate all homesteads in the area. But when they arrived at the Bender Inn on April 3rd, it was abandoned. The cabin was empty, the door unlocked. The Benders were gone. At first, neighbors thought maybe the Benders had been murdered. Maybe they were victims too. Then someone noticed the livestock. The Benders' animals were dead or starving. Nobody had fed them in days. People who abandon their home in a hurry might leave chickens behind. But you'd let them run free so they could forage. The Benders had left animals locked up to die. like they'd fled in the middle of the night with no plan to return. A search party entered the cabin. The first thing they noticed, the smell. The cabin reeked of death, rotting meat, decay. They found the blood-soaked cellar, the trapdoor, the hammer, knives, blood stains on the canvas curtain that William Pickering had noticed months earlier. Someone suggested checking the orchard and vegetable garden. They started digging. May 1873. What they found in the garden behind the Bender cabin was nightmarish. The first body was buried in a shallow grave in the orchard. Male, skull crushed, throat cut so deeply he was nearly decapitated. Then another, and another. In total, they found 11 bodies, 8 in the orchard, 3 in a nearby prairie area. All showed the same pattern. Blunt force trauma to the head, hammer blows, and throats slashed almost to the point of decapitation. Some had been there for months, badly decomposed. Others were more recent. Dr. William York was identified by his brother, Colonel York. He'd been one of the most recent victims. George Lonker and his 18-month-old daughter were found buried together in a single grave. The baby's body was still in her father's arms. Most of the other victims were never identified. Men traveling alone. No one knew their names. No one came looking for them. The story exploded across America. The Bloody Benders headlines screamed in newspapers from New York to California. Harper's Weekly sent reporters. The Associated Press covered it extensively. Thousands of people descended on the Bender property. Tourists, reporters, curiosity seekers. Estimates say 2,000 to 3,000 people per day showed up to gawk at the murder site. People took souvenirs, pieces of the cabin, items from the property. The cabin itself was eventually dismantled by souvenir hunters. Kansas Governor Thomas Osborne offered a $2,000 reward, about $50,000 today, for the capture of the Bender family. Wanted posters were distributed across the country. Wanted, John Bender Sr., about 60, speaks German. Kate Bender Jr., about 24, dark hair and eyes, good-looking, well-formed, fluent talker, speaks good English. The manhunt was on, but the Benders had vanished. Where did they go? Over the next 50 years, there would be dozens of alleged sightings, arrests, and claims about the Benders' fate. None were ever confirmed. Theory 1. Vigilante justice. The most popular local theory was that a group of vigilantes caught the Benders shortly after they fled and killed them without trial. Some claimed Colonel York's search party had actually found them and executed them secretly to avoid a trial that might let them escape on technicalities. A man named S.A. James testified in 1880 that the Benders had been caught and put out of the way in 1873. But there was never any proof. No bodies. No confessions from vigilantes. Just rumors. Theory 2. They escaped. The Benders had several days' head start before anyone realized they'd fled. They could have split up to avoid detection, changed their names, headed to Texas, Mexico, or back east, blended into new communities. Samuel Merrick, an outlaw who'd been in the area, told prison guards years later that he knew where the Benders were. He never revealed the location. Bill and Frank McPherson, 2 criminal brothers, also claimed to know the Benders' whereabouts. Researchers later found evidence that Kansas authorities knew where the Benders were for about 18 months after they fled, but didn't have the budget to pursue them. They wrote to military authorities in Texas requesting help. The military wrote back basically saying, "Not our problem. We're busy with Indian wars." There was also local corruption. The Benders were apparently warned when authorities were coming to investigate, giving them time to flee. Theory 3. The imposters. Over the decades, multiple people were arrested and accused of being the Benders. August 1880. 2 people arrested in Nebraska gave full confessions to being John and Ma Bender. The Chicago Tribune covered it extensively for a week. But when brought to Kansas for identification, neighbors said they were imposters. They were released. November 1889. 2 women in Niles, Michigan, Elvira Hill and Sarah Davis, were arrested and accused of being Ma and Kate Bender. The arrest was pushed by Frances McCann, daughter of one of the Bender victims. A trial proceeded in Kansas, but the women produced evidence placing them in Michigan during the 1873 murders. They were released and later sued for false arrest. Multiple other claims throughout the 1880s to 1920s that Kate Bender has been found, all proved false. Kate Bender especially became legendary, the beautiful serial killer. Newspapers couldn't stop speculating about her. Did she die in obscurity? Marry and have a normal life under a new name? Continue killing elsewhere? We'll never know. 150 years later, the case remains unsolved. In 2020, a man named Bob Miller, a financial advisor from nearby Independence, Kansas, purchased the former Bender property at auction. Why? Because he loves history and wanted to find answers. I bought it because I love history and would like to find out where the killings happened, Miller said. He contacted the University of Kansas Department of Anthropology and Archaeology. In 2023 to 2024, KU students and professors conducted archaeological digs at the site. The land has been farmed for decades, plowing over any surface evidence. But below the plow line, artifacts remain. The team has found about 1,200 artifacts total: broken tableware and glass, wagon parts, nails and building materials, likely from the cabin. Evidence of the cabin's precise location. But they haven't found the most important things: the exact location of the cellar, the abattoir, the orchard cemetery where bodies were buried, remains of unidentified victims. Miller hopes that if they can locate bones or teeth, modern DNA technology could identify victims and potentially match them to living descendants. If we could find some stuff, some bones or maybe teeth, that would allow for DNA matching with living relatives, Miller said. The KU team will continue excavations for at least 2 more summers. And Bob Miller has a bigger dream: a museum dedicated to the Bender story, possibly with a replica cabin, located in a nearby town. Meanwhile, the legend grows. The town of Cherryvale hosted annual Bender Days festivals for years, now discontinued. The Cherryvale Museum has Bender artifacts on display. Books have been written. Hell's Half Acre by Susan Januses, 2022, based on newly discovered archival documents. Hell Comes to Play by Lee Ralph, 2023. The Benders, Keepers of the Devil's Inn by Fern Morrow Wood, 1992. TV shows, podcasts, movies have all covered the case. And a historical marker stands along Highway 400 near Cherryvale. It originally ended with, "The end of the Benders is not known. The earth seemed to swallow them, as it had their victims." That marker has since been updated, but the mystery remains. The Bloody Benders weren't just random killers. They represent something darker about American history. 1. The frontier was lawless. We romanticize the Wild West, cowboys, pioneers, frontier spirit. But the reality was brutal. Isolation, violence, no law enforcement for hundreds of miles. The Benders operated for 2 to 3 years, murdering at least 11 people, before anyone investigated seriously. Why? Because the frontier was chaos. 2. Women serial killers are rare but deadly. Most serial killers are men. But when women are involved, like Kate Bender and Ma Bender, they're often more calculated, more patient, more successful at avoiding detection. Kate used her charm and beauty as a weapon. She lured victims with spiritualism and hospitality. She was the perfect cover. 3. Family operations are terrifying. Solo serial killers are scary. But family operations, where multiple people participate, cover for each other, normalize the killing, are a different level of horror. The Benders had a system. Division of labor. Kate lured. John Jr. killed. Everyone helped dispose of bodies. It was a family business. 4. They were never caught. This might be the most disturbing part. The Bloody Benders committed at least 11 murders, became nationally infamous, had a $2,000 bounty on their heads, and they just disappeared. They either escaped and lived out their lives under new identities, or they were killed by vigilantes and buried in unmarked graves. Either way, no justice, no trial, no closure. At least 11 people dead. Skulls crushed, throats slashed, buried in a garden like trash, a family operation, for people working together to rob and murder travelers for 2 to 3 years. A beautiful young woman using spiritualism and charm to lure victims to their deaths. A blood-soaked cellar where bodies were drained like livestock. And then nothing. The Benders vanished into history. For 150 years, people have been obsessed with this case. Because it combines everything that makes a mystery irresistible. Serial killers, family secrets, frontier violence, a beautiful female villain, an unsolved disappearance. The Bloody Benders were America's first documented serial killer family. Not the first serial killers, but the first family operation that we know of. They proved that evil doesn't always come from individuals. Sometimes it comes from families, from groups working together, from systems of murder disguised as hospitality. And somewhere, maybe in a forgotten cemetery, maybe in unmarked graves in Texas or Mexico, maybe still alive under new names in 1920s America, the Benders either died or lived out their lives. We'll probably never know which. But their victims, they're still there, buried in that Kansas orchard. Most of them nameless. Most of them forgotten except as numbers in a body count. George Lonker holding his 18-month-old daughter. Dr. William York. 8 other men whose names we don't even know. They stopped for a meal. They trusted a charming young woman and her family. And they were murdered for the money in their pockets. So here's my question. If you'd been traveling the Osage Trail in 1872, would you have stopped at the Bender Inn? Would you have noticed the warnings? Or would you have trusted Kate's smile? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story gave you chills, if you can't stop thinking about that blood-soaked canvas curtain and that tiny trapdoor, subscribe, hit that bell, and share this with someone who loves unsolved mysteries. Because the Bloody Benders are still out there. Not physically, they've been dead for over a century. But their story lives on. A reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like your friendly innkeeper. Sometimes they offer you a hot meal and a place to rest. And sometimes, when you sit down at that table with your back to the curtain, you never get back up. Until next time, watch your back. Literally.